Hello everyone, and welcome to this Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring webinar on 5 ways to inform your school development goals based on research. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please note that your microphones are muted. We cannot hear any members of the audience, and this is to ensure good sound quality. If you'd like to ask questions, please post them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. You'll receive a certificate of attendance, which will be sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes, and you'll receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides sent to you via email next week. Just a little bit about Cambridge Chem before I hand over to Mark. So Cambridge Chem is the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. We've been working with schools for over 40 years in over 100 countries. And we're known for our evidence-based research approach to baseline and formative assessments, using extensive data sets to support future outcomes and development. We work with schools, ministries, and associations to transform the outcomes of the students they teach. And in 2019, we became part of the University of Cambridge, which has supported our reach and abilities to support young people across the world. We help teachers turn data into knowledge, we bridge the gap between research and practice, and we provide evidence to support good decision making. So with that, I'll now hand over to Mark Fraser, who's the Teaching and Learning Lead at Chem. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Megan. As Megan said, I'm teaching and learning lead here at Chem. I've been at Chem for about 8 years now. Prior to that, I was a head teacher of a couple of schools in the northeast of England, and over the 18 years or so I taught in 3 schools altogether. So I'm a primary person, early years person by trade, if you like, but hopefully what we're about to talk about this afternoon is more general and can be applied whatever your age range or phase. So 5 main areas that I'd like to cover. First of all, just very briefly, I want to talk about well-being. We've talked about well-being in a few other webinars, but I just do want to recap slightly on some of the research that we've pointed out around well-being and the importance of personal well-being to your students in particular. After that, 2 slightly older documents from probably about 10 or 11 years ago. We've got some great sort of meta studies here, 2 meta studies there, What Makes Great Teaching and Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction. We'll have a look at those. Really good top tips on what you can do to improve teaching and learning in your setting. After that, we'll have a think about sort of why assessment is important and what a good assessment model might look like. And then finally, to round off, something that's quite well covered at the moment in the news, and certainly I've been at several events over the last few months about artificial intelligence, the coming revolution, or is it already here? So first of all, why do we think personal well-being is important? 2 reports I'm just going to show you here. The first one is this one from the Children's Society, just last year, but based on data from period between going back to the early sort of 90s, but some of the graphs I'm about to show you are particularly over the last 10 years or so, showing how students report their well-being at home, but also in terms of life as a whole and in school as well, because those things can be very different. As this is based on a survey covers about 5,000 households across the UK, and unfortunately it's a little bit gloomy in the sense that, well, on the positive side, family life seems to be fairly sort of stable for children and young people. They're sort of bubbling around there. These are reported happiness scores, if you like, how content and how sort of happy children and young people are feeling. And you can see at home, fairly level. But when you look at life as a whole and school in particular, they're far more sort of erratic in terms of school, for sure, up and down. But in both cases, downward trends are fairly evident there. That data runs, as you can see, to 2020. Now, that clearly was a major turning point in our recent history. And following up from that, we don't have any more Children's Society data, but we do have some sort of indications that have come from some work that a couple of colleagues in Cambridge carried out. Got Matthew Carroll and Filio Constantinu's report from earlier this year, where they contacted teachers and they'd been asking the questions about well-being in schools, and what did teachers think? How did they perceive young people's well-being had been affected? And again, quite a gloomy picture in terms of those surveyed, mainly teachers. They responded by saying that a large group there, as you can see, perceived that young people's well-being was a little worse since the pandemic, and a few in that sort of dark red area there, as you can see, thought that the well-being was much worse for children and young people. So again, quite a disappointing picture here. So in Cambridge, we thought about what can we do to support children and young people, particularly in the context of school. And we had a study that we've looked at here, and you can look at it too, by Ros McClellan and Susan Stewart from the Faculty of Education, and they look at the well-being in the context of school or college, because there are quite a lot of well-being studies out there, but not all of them are focused solely on school or college life. So again, this is a really interesting read if you want to think about your well-being plans in school, what policies you use, how you implement your support mechanisms, because they base their model on 4 areas of well-being, which are kind of under 2 overarching areas there. We've got feeling and functioning. And below feelings, we've got life satisfaction, how much students experience contentment, negative emotions, how inclined students are to dwell on the sort of the negative aspects of school life. Interpersonal well-being under the functioning side of things here, how students are relating to their peers and to their teachers in school. And finally, competence well-being, how much students experience that sense of fulfillment and purpose. So you've got this really nice model that you can look at. It uses as kind of 4 different lenses to look at your students' well-being. Again, you could think like, why is it important to be doing this? Like you would question hopefully most of the things you do in school, but we've got some nice research as well that shows that better well-being is linked with motivation. And it's unsurprising really that if students are more highly motivated, they want to learn and they will make progress because of that. And of course, the flip side of that coin, students with lower levels of well-being are less well engaged and are more likely to truant, to skip school. And if they're not in school, they're probably not learning. And that is exactly what we do not want to happen. Or they're certainly not learning the things that we would like them to learn. As mentioned before, we've touched on this quite a lot in some of our well-being webinars over the last year or so. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, you can go to our website. The link here, when you get the slides, you can just follow the link. You can see where I've circled in red there. Follow that, and it will take you to our most recent recording of a well-being webinar, and you can find out a lot more about it. Moving on. Second topic I'd like to talk about is what makes great teaching. Now, Chem's been around for 40 years this year, and I was having a look around sort of our archive and thinking, what have we done in the sort of fairly recent past that stood the test of time? And this document was prepared, as you can see, October 2014 by a couple of Chem staff, Professor Rob Coe and Cesare Aloisi, who's no longer in Chem, Steve Higgins from the School of Education, and Lee Elliott Major, who I think has moved on, but at the time was at the Sutton Trust. I think Lee Elliott Major is now at the University of Exeter. And they prepared this document. It's a study of studies ahead of a big research conference that was happening that year. And essentially a review of research evidence which relates to teaching and learning. And it looks at 3 key questions. What is good pedagogy? What kinds of frameworks or tools could help us to capture what's going on when children learn? And how could you use this to promote better learning? And again, follow the links when you get the slides if you're interested in seeing more, or just Google this. It's freely available on the internet, as is everything I'm showing you today. And I'm just going to pick out the key messages and then just have a very quick think about what you could do in your school setting to implement the advice it gives. So there's 2 factors it starts off with in this the executive summary, which provide the strongest evidence of improving pupil attainment are teachers' content knowledge. That's kind of teachers knowing the subjects they're teaching. Again, none of this should come as a surprise, really, because it does seem like common sense in many ways. However, this is great evidence that these are not just our kind of misguided beliefs. These are evidence-based and proven to be factual. It's just fact that teachers knowing their stuff leads to their students learning more effectively. They can clearly address misconceptions, stretch and challenge their students. They know the boundaries of what their students know and should know by this stage, and can just kind of push on the learning. And clearly their professional skills as well are intrinsically linked to this. So the quality of instruction, the craft of teaching, if you like, which includes using a variety of strategies like effective questioning and assessment, they're pillars of improving pupil attainment. And then there are lots of examples of specific practices, as they call them, which have good evidence to support improved attainment. I think I'm not going to read through the list here, but you can just see this is almost just a kind of checklist or a self-help list, if you want to think of it, that you can use as teachers or pass on to your colleagues. Great for staff meetings, professional development sessions, but basically it's quite accessible, and it is also very doable with little or no cost. Basically just challenging students, as you can see, to ask questions and to provide explanations. Spacing out study or practice, and so it's just that kind of repetitive system of kind of revisiting things. And we know if you practice anything, whether it's playing the guitar or sort of learning about GCSE physics, the more that you do, the better that you get. This is a slightly controversial point, that sort of 4th bullet point down there. This is sort of testing improves attainment. It's possibly not testing per se, but it's the preparation that goes into tests that students undertake, because they are reviewing the facts, they're reviewing their notes, they are thinking about things in a slightly different way, and they're just kind of covering the same ground over and over again. And it's the old thing, perhaps you throw enough mud, some of it will stick. So tried and tested things, but nice to see the evidence saying that these are worthwhile activities. Again, on the bottom here, there are other side of the coin, things that may not necessarily work. Kind of lavish praise perhaps is not shown to be effective. Allowing learners to discover key ideas by themselves. There's a nice overlap there with one of the most recent PISA studies that showed that students who were just allowed to lead their own learning quite often just did not move on at the pace of others who were carefully guided and shepherded along the appropriate route. Ability grouping, perhaps not a great idea. I know teachers have mixed views on that, but again, if you want to know more about it, go and have a look at this report. And then something right at the end, the VAK debate. I know some people think there's something in it. I think I did at one point, but perhaps I've reviewed my sort of opinions on that. But certainly preferred learning styles, maybe not as effective. Coming at things from a variety of angles, something that's slightly different there, I think, but the VAK model, the visual auditory kinesthetic approach, again, read this for a bit more background on that. But again, this report does not conclude that that is an effective way of learning. And then something else, again, from about the same sort of era, Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction. In fact, it's referenced in the What Makes Good Teaching Guide. Again, this is something which appeared in the American Educator in 2012, and I see this coming to the surface again and again and again in blog posts and web articles. It's something that really has stood the test of time. Again, it's a study of studies. It's looking for evidence, and it's looking, as you can see here, from 3 principal sources. So the research in cognitive science, how we think, research on what's in the US are called master teachers. I suppose in sort of the UK setting, you might call them advanced skills teachers. And then research on what they call cognitive supports. They are maybe frameworks and scaffolds and devices to help students focus and study more effectively. Again, I don't pretend you can read any of the article on the right, but it's just there for illustration purposes. This one, again, is just freely available, but you can see as you go through the article, it has 10 principles of instruction. Again, I'm not going to read through them. You can read through this in your own time, but again, just simple, low-cost, effective ways of doing things. And a lot of it is just about practice and guided practice and acting in a timely way, questioning students, engaging in discussion and dialogue, thinking aloud. I think I used to do this a little bit when I was in the classroom in terms of when I was trying to model something, particularly when children asked me something that I didn't know. And it was like, how are we going to find out? What would I do? And just sort of provide those models of how you would go about researching, effective search techniques, if you like, when you're using something like Google, sifting through the vast amount of information that you're bombarded with, and whittling down to what it is that you need to focus on. And again, just this constant revisiting and checking of understanding. So that's assessment in many ways, just this informal questioning. It's assessment, not necessarily of learning or for learning, but perhaps what we would today call assessment as learning. It's just integral to the whole process. And just that sort of keeping a track of what your students are doing and engaging them in regular reviews. There is, interestingly, the document starts off with 10 principles of instruction, but actually hidden within it, there's this orange box, and there are actually 17 principles in here. And again, really good material for staff meetings, professional development sessions, checklists for teachers, particularly for early career teachers, newly qualified. They maybe just need this kind of scaffolding themselves. Again, it suggests earlier on that those devices, those scaffolds, those kind of just whether we want to call them sort of cheat sheets or kind of prompt cards, they're the kinds of things that children will benefit from, but so will adults. And I think really, really useful checklists here for general ongoing professional development in school. And just one quote that really stands out there, and it just says, the most successful teachers spent more time in guided practice, more time asking questions, more time checking for understanding, and more time correcting errors. Like I said, not just true for students, but true for teachers. None of us stop learning, or we shouldn't. So this is just great material for ongoing professional development. I've touched there briefly on assessment and thinking about what assessment is and should be. And you could ask the question, why should we assess anything? Because it has been, particularly in my context in the United Kingdom, we've been accused as a profession, I think, of measuring too often and too frequently and being distracted by that. So we've got to be careful about what we do when it comes to assessment and do it for the right reasons. But in a nutshell, if you can assess or measure something, you gather more information about it. You put yourself in a stronger position by increasing your understanding of it. And if you're in that better position, well, you're better prepared to make informed, evidence-based choices. That could be said for any subject, whether it was what we started off talking about, well-being, geography, art, PE, history, whatever your subject area is. Gathering information about what your students know and can do is great to monitor the progress, but it's also essential for you as a teacher knowing what you need to reflect on with the students, what you need to kind of cover again, what you can move on to do next. All of those vital decisions that are central to your planning are just totally dependent on the quality of information that you are putting into the system. One of my sort of models that I come back to again and again when I think about assessment is something I've kind of found very interesting, and it comes not from kind of mainstream, primary or early years or secondary education, but from medical education. So it's a model primarily designed for deciding how well medical students, trainee doctors are doing in university settings, but there's an awful lot, I think, that we can borrow from it. In fact, there's an awful lot of overlaps with the kind of practice that you would see in early years settings. Again, a group of academics from the Netherlands, Van der Vleuten et al., and they've got some really nice sort of principles behind what they call a multimodal approach or programmatic assessment. It's very principled, and they set out their stall early on certainly in the 2012 paper by saying assessment should drive learning. It's what I was talking about a few moments ago. It's putting that information into the system, if you like, and the better quality information you have about your students, the better your decision making is going to be. They're also very honest about it, and they're very upfront, and they say no single method of assessment can do it all, especially when you're looking at a vast range of skills that we expect from our young people today. They're very honest about themselves and say that bias is an inherent characteristic of expert judgment. We are all kind of colored to some extent by our own viewpoints. So you need alternatives, you need alternative perspectives. And a word that's used a lot to describe assessments, validity. And they're very much in line with sort of my view on this in terms of saying validity is not a quality of an assessment itself, but rather it's a quality of how you use the assessment. So you could have the best assessment in the world for learning, for evaluating, young people learning to drive a car, but that assessment is not going to be very much use for young people learning to fly an aircraft, perhaps. I'm using two sort of quite bizarre examples there, but the point is, if you are assessing something, you've got to be very careful that the information it's providing is valid in terms of if you are making a decision about what I don't know, subjects young people may go on to study next. We need to be very clear that anything that we are doing is designed for the right purpose. And what they do point out is, as well as numerical data, qualitative data, that's narrative information, that carries an awful lot of weight, and that should never be forgotten, especially in a holistic view of assessment. And they have, again, this follow-up paper, and they've got 12 tips for programmatic assessment, what you can do, what you can think about doing in your classrooms. And it's just, again, a lot of common sense here, but basically, decisions they suggest are only made, or should only be made when sufficient information is gathered across individual moments or time points of assessment, and growth and development should be monitored and mentored. So again, this is an ongoing process. This isn't a one-off summative assessment. This is truly formative. And again, it's just simple things that I was probably taught as a young teacher as well. Just look at the different things that are going on. As a teacher, you see all sorts of things happening on a daily basis. You've got things that students produce. Children and young people produce what we would technically call, I suppose, learning artifacts. That's a piece of work in their exercise book. It's a drawing, it's a painting, it's a model they've made. It's a role play situation that they've engaged in. It's a team game they've played. All of these things that you record in some way. So that could be, on paper, it could be on film, it could be in the form of a junk model for very young children. It could be anything. And of course, observation. You are watching the students all the time. You are seeing what they do. Some things certainly lend themselves to observation and observation alone. Things like, I don't know, collaboration perhaps. How do young people interact with each other in the classroom? We can't really expect that there could be a paper assessment for that, but as a teacher, you can be observing that. Things like 21st century skills, which you've heard a lot about, things like creativity. I mean, it's possible to see kind of the output of the creative process, if you like, a work of art, but actually how can we record or capture in some way the creative process if it weren't through observation? So again, something to be thought through quite carefully depending on your subject area, and perhaps in your area as well, data is key. Summative assessments could be really useful as sort of benchmarks along the way. How a student is performing in terms of mathematics, things that are fairly subjective, then I think data becomes more important. For things that are far more subjective, certainly observation and evidence in the form of learning artifacts are probably more valuable as well. But we need to triangulate this. We need a full picture. And again, in their 2012 paper, they have this kind of schematic here that it just shows you like the sequence of events that you might have: learning tasks, learning artifacts, single assessment, data points, certification data points for older students or for mastery tasks. Again, remember this comes from the medical world. And then you've got other things, how well does the learner reflect on their sort of experiences and on their learning so far? How do they plan for their own learning, and how do they interact with others? So again, just some really nice things to think about when you are designing an assessment policy or an assessment model for your particular setting. Again, the links for all of these are at the end of the document, or the slide deck when it comes out. And then finally, just to round off, we've got something which is becoming increasingly prominent in society: artificial intelligence. The revolution, is it coming, or has it actually arrived already? I think probably a year ago, I had no idea about ChatGPT. And again, that's taken off like a rocket. We know that it can be useful for teachers to find out, to research things, but also we know children and young people can use it to basically, for want of a better phrase, do their homework. You know, it's becoming very difficult now to decide what has a young person genuinely written themselves or what has been created using something like ChatGPT. Again, a couple of stories just I've highlighted there from the BBC website that have popped up in the recent past. You know, lots of thought going into this, and it's fair to say, I think, that we think artificial intelligence, whatever that is, whether that's ChatGPT or something else, something a little bit more kind of hidden and behind the scenes, but whatever it is and however it manifests itself, it's likely to be the next big disruptor to education. There are likely to be great opportunities for improvement, but certainly threats to fairness and equality. And again, not just fairness and equality from people using the system or people not using the system, but people just having access or not having access. That can be groundbreaking, I think, in terms of the social disruption or the equity or the sort of the inequity that this could produce. I think teachers, you know, and educators in general certainly need to be thinking about how we use this safely, specifically to enhance learning opportunities, because we do, you know, a few years ago, again, when I started teaching in the late 90s, the internet was not really a thing. It was just coming to the surface, but did not really exist in my school, probably until about the year 2000. And again, it's just unthinkable now to imagine a world without it. And as we know, lots and lots of benefits to using the internet, but we've got to be very careful how we do it, because there is a lot of content out there that we probably do not want our children and young people to be looking at. The same can probably be said for AI, double-edged sword for sure. And then the paper I'd like to point out is this one, which comes from just a couple of months back, I think, from, or just last month, August. A couple of big names on this, in particular Dylan Wiliam and John Hattie as well, who are well known in the assessment world. And they've been looking together with Aaron Hamilton here to think about the future of AI in education. And they've thought about, you know, it's an interesting title, you know, 13 things we can do to minimize the damage. So it's slightly pessimistic. This is not just looking at the benefits of what we could actually use this this new power for, but there's a great quote here at the start, you know, in all the hype about artificial intelligence, we need to properly assess these risks to collectively decide whether the AI upsides are worth it and whether we should stick or twist. And I think that just means so we stick with what we're doing at the moment, or twist and move on and embrace the new technology. Again, the paper discusses the pros and cons of what AI may bring for us, and just tries to stop us, in their words, sleepwalking into a future that we can't get out of. They've got some benefits and concerns here that they summarize in this table. All sorts of things that could be great, but certainly things that we do not want to happen as well on the other side of the table. So this could be revolutionary in a really positive way, but actually it could be a disaster in many others. We know I've tried asking ChatGPT questions about, you know, just education in general, things I'm interested, you know, outside of work, and sometimes it seems to be bang on, but other times it just seems to be, you know, barking up the wrong tree completely. It's only as good as the information that's out there already, so we've got to be very aware that the model that the AI is kind of learning from is actually a sound foundation. Again, I'm not particularly qualified to talk about how that would work, but I'm sort of long in the tooth enough to know that we just need to be approaching this with a bit of care and a bit of caution, particularly if you are running a school or you're managing how learners learn at the moment, because I think a big change is on the horizon. And again, they have 13 recommendations. I've just picked out a few here. And this is a really interesting one at the start here. They just assume that we might just be 2 years away from this kind of revolution almost. And students should not just have sort of unrestricted access. We need to be very certain of what they are using here, and there should be these safeguards in place and measures in place also to mitigate bias and discrimination, particularly if they're being used to judge children's performance or young people's performance, particularly in high stakes assessments, for example. We need to be very, very sure that that is a very transparent process. And that would be point 10 there, where we would require explanations to be provided, justifying why decisions have been made. Again, fascinating things, slightly terrifying at the same time, but again, another really good paper if you want to have a look at that and think about what this may mean for you in your school in the very near future. So at that point, I'm probably just going to pause and ask Megan to see if there have been any questions come in, but thank you so much for listening. As mentioned, I'm just going to just zip forward there to show you the references there at the end. So when you get the slide deck, you can follow up on anything that is of interest. But thanks again for listening, and back over to Megan.
No, thank you so much, Mark. That was really, really interesting. Yeah, as Mark said, we'll be sending the slides around so you can have a look through all of the references that Mark's included in his presentation today, as well as the recording of this webinar to you in the next week or so. I'm just having a look here at the chat and the questions. It doesn't look like any have come through. But maybe just to say that if you're watching this recording or after the end of the webinar, you think of any questions that you might like to ask, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email address is cem@cambridge.org, or if you go to our website, cem.org, which is in the bottom left of the screen at the minute, there's an option on our website to get in touch with us as well, and we'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I'll just say a big thank you to Mark for presenting today and to all of you for attending. Just a reminder, we'll send the slides and the recording out to you next week. And please feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any questions or want to discuss anything that you heard about today further. But that's everything from us. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.